Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, magical ones, to the show. We have an amazing episode for you today, which is very topical given that I have been birthing a new archetypal apothecary method and also a brand new Secret Witch Society Facebook group, which if you are not yet a part of our community, you may well wish to head over and join us over at Secret Witch Society on Facebook. On the show today, though, our guest is Andrea Clarke. Andrea is a feminine embodiment coach, holistic pelvic care practitioner, and intuitive healer, having cut her teeth in bodywork and energy medicine over 20 years ago. She helps women who feel numb and disconnected to reawaken their creative flow and align with clarity and direction with their soul purpose. Her womb space is her guide and muse, and she seeks to fulfill her deepest desires, that which she wishes to birth through her. In this juicy episode, we dived into womb communion and how healing feminine reclamation is for any woman, but especially for those women wanting a gateway to their soul gifts. We dived into the nuance in the depth of feminine embodiment and how true intimacy with the wisdom of your womb is two-way, including both listening and communing. We also dived into the archetypal remedy of the rose and how softening, opening and relaxing leads to our full expression, and how the healing power lies in our own womb space. Let's dive in. Welcome, Andrea. Oh my body feels so nourished to be recording with your beautiful feminine energy. I was just explaining before we started, like your energy just feels like that really nourishing rose energy, which is if I'm talking in archetypal energies, that's the energy that I would be feeling from you. So I'm delighted to have you on the show. It was very nourishing, and you're also one of my own trusted healers, so I really wanted to share your magic with our listeners as well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited to share some lovely, magical, little downloads and just some juicy womb conversations.
Oh, I love that. Juicy womb conversation. That's a great start. I would love to firstly invite you to share a little bit about your own journey. And we're talking about like communion with the womb. I'd love to hear a little bit about why you took this journey of feminine healing. It's a journey that is very close to my own heart. It's one that I initiate women into as well. So I know how important it is. And I'd just love to hear a little bit more about your journey.
Well, my personal healing journey began a long time ago, over 25 years ago. I spent my 20s in London with a nice little drug addiction. I chose to deal with that and work with that myself. I sold my flat, I left my job, I moved back home, got drawn back into London, moved into a kind of clubby scene for a few years, kind of started dipping out, was just in a reaching that kind of rock bottom point really, where I was just really became aware that, my life just really wasn't working. And then I'd already kind of dipped into things like astrology and crystals and stuff like that. But it wasn't until I became pregnant at 33 and it became quite obvious that my daughter's father wasn't going to be prepared to take any kind of meaningful role in her life. So I consulted my astrologer and I said, do you think it'd be good to move home? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. So that is what I did. And when I moved back, I found that the work that I was doing, which was retail fashion and management, that just didn't kind of fit in with single parenting. And so I think the first kind of thing I did when I got back, so I did like a weekend course in reflexology, and everything kind of blossomed and grew from that point, really. So my grounding is in bodywork and energy field healing. And it wasn't really until I started moving into fertility work in terms of the reflexology, reproductive health. But I think the pivotal point was when I did a workshop with a main abdominal massage practitioner. And from there, I trained in women fertility massage. And that's really where that kind of deeper, or that beginning of an understanding of the energies of the womb space, that really began to kind of blossom. And then when I began my training with Tammy Lynn Kent, who has written a few books, but the main one is Wild Feminine. And then I realized I kind of missed out a massive piece. I'd been so focused on this energy of the ovaries, of the womb space, that I completely missed out the energetics of these beautiful creative spaces of the ovaries. So I suppose each time I've done any trainings, it's taken me on a deeper path within myself. And, from that, my understanding and my own kind of personal desires and needs in terms of, I suppose, reaching my soul expression and really what I'm here to do just gets deeper and deeper. And what I've found is that connection with my womb space, which feels now is that I'm terming it that womb communion, which I know is kind of like potentially triggering for a lot of people in terms of that religious connection and holy communion. And I had a deep conversation with somebody about it the other day who's actually was born in and raised in a Catholic family, because it just kind of feels as though it potentially triggers, but yet that is the right word for it, because it's not a conversation. It's a communion. A communion is a different thing, because that's about opening a two-way conversation, an intimate conversation about feelings, and allowing a space for your womb to fully express what she's holding, where she's been, because I do feel she's an aspect of our consciousness, and I do feel that she's traveled with us through many lifetimes, and the way that she might have experienced something is not necessarily the way that we mentally have dealt with that situation or even felt about that situation. There's sometimes, we can experience something, but she might be holding a different perspective that we're not kind of considered. So that's kind of like, this is really my kind of space to assist myself as much, as I'm learning through this process as much as anybody else. I don't kind of claim to be like the finished article in any way, shape or form. This is kind of my journey, but I understand the richness and the wisdom to be able to share that with other people, other women.
Oh, there's so much in that I'm like, where do I begin? I always do this and I say, can people just please share their journey? And then I'm like, oh my God, there's like 10 places that I could go here. There's so much richness in what you just said. So let me just feel into where to go. I think one of the things that stood out as you were sharing was this idea of like rock bottom. And I think that's something I often speak to when guests share that, because it always seems and appears that there's some kind of rock bottom that has initiated into the feminine or their power or whatever it is that their particular gift is. So I loved that you shared that. And then it also struck me as significant that it was almost like your initiation was also at that, similarly to mine actually, at that point of like giving birth, which when women's initiations are around the kind of different feminine life cycle things, I always think, oh yes, this is juicy, this is interesting. So I really see how the feminine was calling to you there. I don't know if you've got anything to speak to on that.
Yeah, I totally believe that my daughter arrived at imperfect time, and that she, in her wisdom, was able to drag me out of the place that I was in. I'm not sure what else would have really, I'm not sure what else would have had the real power to be able to do that. You know, I knew that I was probably going to have to bring her up on my own. And yet there was never any doubt that she'd arrived in the rightful time, even though it kind of like completely shitted up everything about where I was. And I was just starting to move in a different direction in terms of work. And so things were kind of really opening up. And then, so it was like, well, you have a real opportunity. You have a choice here. Do you want to go down the route down the right? Or do you want to take this left path into mothering and really kind of, you know, feel into that? You know, I didn't have that level of awareness at the time, but I suppose I had enough connection to trust, for whatever reason, even though on paper it looked like a dodgy decision. You know, I didn't have to move out of London, but it felt like the right thing. So yeah, it was a baptism of fire for sure.
Yeah, it's often is, isn't it? It'd be really nice if we had the wisdom that we have now back when we had the initiation.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I suppose that was a really big piece, because my daughter was born by C-section. And the reason for that is that they only realized when I was something like 38, 39 weeks pregnant that she was actually extended breech. But if I knew then what I know now, I would have employed lots of different people to assist with that. I mean, if I'd known earlier, that would have been really super helpful. So that was definitely kind of like a sparking point in. I've had experiences that if I can support another woman who's experiencing something similar or is moving down that pathway, if I can help support her to find her clarity and vision into her true path, then that's what I'm here to do.
Gorgeous.
That is my soul calling.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things, I think there's such a gift in having a guide in that way. And I think the same for me in my own initiations back then. I didn't necessarily have a guide, which is why I think it's so valuable. Like I've got guides now and I can see how valuable that is. But yeah, the other piece that stood out to me with that was with what you were saying there is, when we have these initiations, the way I see it now, and I think what you're speaking to as well, is that it's almost like our soul called us into those experiences so that we could learn from them. And that learning, I always say as well, our gifts are in our wounds. Our learning then becomes a gift to others. So
absolutely. I mean, it's a really interesting piece around the drug addiction, because I remember having a thought, and it literally just kind of plopped into my head about when I come across heroin, I'm going to try it. I'd done nothing at that point. I was like 17. I'd had nothing at that point. But yet that was a journey I needed to travel with. You know, I have no idea. Well, I have ideas now why that is. But, you know, that was the piece that brought me to my knees for me then to kind of start rebuilding things from the ground up. We spoke before the call about, we have to do the kind of the deep excavations into the shitty, muddy, groundy kind of stuff, don't we? To really kind of come into ourselves with any kind of depth.
Yeah, beautiful. As you were speaking about the drug addiction, I think kind of those sorts of things are one of the ways that we can experience a disconnection from the feminine. I think that, and all sorts of other ways that are like almost the distractions, aren't they, from what our bodies are really wanting us to know, like drugs, alcohol, even sex and work and TV, and all these distractions can be ways of disconnecting, maybe unconscious ways as well of disconnecting.
Yeah, I think it was, that life just felt so harsh. Everything just felt so harsh. I think, the thing about me, which I only really fully appreciated, and this is only like really a few years ago, that I came into this world reading energy, and it just felt like a complete bombardment of my senses. And what people were saying to me, particularly, in those early years within the family dynamic, what people were saying to me, I was kind of like, that's not how I'm feeling that in my body, and then to be told, no, you're wrong. What you're feeling is wrong. This is what is being said. And so this is what it's right. And so that kind of created that, like, I think I didn't have the words to explain that then, obviously, but that was kind of like, well, so what I'm feeling is wrong. What I'm experiencing is wrong. What everybody else is saying is right. So that kind of creates a real inner tension, and then a desire to kind of numb out of that, because it just felt too painful, too uncomfortable. And no one kind of like really understanding and listening in. I think that would be very different now, because we have a whole host of wonderful parents who kind of have just a completely different level of understanding of the sensitivities and the vibrations and the frequencies of their children.
I really love what you're talking about there, actually, because again, it speaks to the common thing that magical women who may be listening to this show, they often experience. They are often born deeply sensitive and feminine essence beings, and then they hit up against this kind of, like you're talking about, that harsh, almost masculine feeling energy. And I've come to kind of alchemize that for myself in learning to receive the masculine, but I think there's a real piece there around that's just how that's how we're born as magical women, as witches. We are typically born sensitive. One of the pieces that also stood out, I don't know if you've read Maureen Murdoch's The Heroine's Journey. It just spoke to me of that cycle as well. It's another great book.
Yeah, I think I've read it in reference to Sharon Blackie, When Women Rise Rooted. I think she references that book quite a bit there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think we all need our journeys, don't we? I think we all need our personal journeys of reclamation, and otherwise we're kind of like, we don't get the opportunity to kind of dig in deep. But then, having said that, I think that souls that are being birthed in this world now have a completely different requirement. And I suppose one of the other aspects of the work that I do is to assist women to be able to call in those souls, those high vibrational souls, by clearing the debris, clearing the funk, because and really becoming energy aware for their children, so they can really fully understand the needs of their children coming through, because that's the only way we're going to change this shit show of a world that we're currently living in, isn't it? I mean, we're all doing the work that we can do personally, but also there's a big piece around creating the optimal environments for these souls, these high vibrational souls, to come through, who might never have actually experience what it is to be on this plane, whereas we're like old timers that have been here many, many times, even though I don't come from here, but I've been on this plane many, many times.
I love that. And I'm already thinking of some of my clients who are going to love this conversation. Let me just see where to go from here, because there was something you said. I want to just bring it back into the womb communion. I also love, I was actually just recording another episode with someone else, funnily enough, this morning about religious deconditioning as well. And so I loved the piece you said about communion with the womb, and yes, that being triggering, but actually there does seem to be a huge theme in the witch of that religious kind of fear, and it's something that's come up a lot recently, and I know will come up for my clients who, funnily enough, the ones who I said were going to be interested in what you were just talking about as well. So I'm feeling feeling that would be a good place to just dig a little bit deeper into. I'm wondering if you've got anything else to share around this kind of resistance to communion with the womb from a religious perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up in a not particularly religious family, erring on the side of Church of England. We didn't go to church. My lineage through my mum's side, they were kind of like, into the Ouija boards and seances, typical of that kind of turn of the 20th century kind of vibe that they were all into. I think they all went to spiritualist churches. I mean, I was christened, but I never felt, and this is really, from my mother, I never felt that I needed to go to church to experience a spiritual connection. So I don't feel triggered by using what some people might perceive as religious wording. I think that's very different if you're born into the Catholic faith, because I think for a lot of women who have been, there's such a heavy doctrination. So I kind of realize it might trigger people, but my suggestion would be is, if you are, just sit with that. Sit with what arises. It's always about being curious, isn't it? And I know that word is kind of like a little bit overused, but rather than kind of going into the shame and blame, it's like I'm just going to be curious. What is it that's arisen there? Why does that make me so fucking angry when she's using those words, which are kind of religious terminology, in this kind of context? To me, we're creating a different paradigm, aren't we? And actually, I'm entitled to have communion, which is about that close two-way conversation and expression. I'm entitled to have that with my own body and with my own essence. But yeah, I think if it triggers, it's if you feel open to that, is to just sit with what arises.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'd love to talk a little bit more to communion. I know that's what we've called this episode, and this might be something that's perhaps foreign to some women who are listening. So I'm wondering if you can describe what you mean by communion with your womb.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of initially called it, I think, a womb journey.
I personally love communion.
Yeah, it just felt something more than just a journey. It is a journey, but it felt really important to elevate it into something more sacred than a journey. So how that looks, what that looks like, I suppose, in a session or in a workshop, is to create an intentional space, because I think we create that intention that kind of creates the container, the masculine container, if you like, to hold the energy, so the energy knows kind of it's safe, because it is about creating, within the intention of creating safe space for the womb, your womb space. So this isn't necessarily about having the physical womb, this is the energetic womb space. So it's irrelevant whether you have a physical womb or not. But creating that safe space for her to feel as though she's able to express. So that feels quite different too. And I was just writing a piece about it this morning, is, because I get a lot of women say, well, I talk to my womb all the time. And I would, for me is the point of, okay, so you talk to your womb. Is that the same as creating a safe space for her to be able to express herself?
Oh, I love
it's
that.
It's coming from coming from a slightly different perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
And some people might.
There's a nuance in it. I think it's almost like it's the same thing, but it's a deeper layer. And it reminds me of what we were just talking to before before we began recording, actually, how I often illuminate that there's, and I call it like woo light or goddess light work, which isn't intrinsically light. It's still magic, it's still woo, it's still valid, it's still a part of the path that we need to journey through before we get to what I call the woo deep. But it feels like that's the kind of distinction between what I would call like the goddess dresser work or the woo light work, which again can be triggering for women who have been like invested in that. And it's, again, I say it's not a wasted part of the journey, but it's like there's another part of the map where you can journey to, where there's another layer of depth that we can go to with this.
Yeah. And I think, it's the same with clients, isn't it? Some clients, and some women aren't being called that deeply in, and that's absolutely okay.
Yeah.
We all have our own unique journeys, and we have to understand, if kind of that level is where you want to be and you receive what you need in that level, that's absolutely fine. There's no kind of there's no judgment. We should all be diving in deeper, because, I know that the work that I do probably now still feels kind of like triggering and new and kind of like a little bit misunderstood and not kind of really not deeply resonating with for a lot of women. But I know a few years down the line that's going to be completely changing. Like when I first trained in holistic pelvic care, which is the internal massage, and I just kind of I just felt the need to shout it from the rooftops about it. It's an amazing thing. Like, everybody who's got a vagina needs to have this work.
Yeah.
This is, we all need to find out what our vaginas are holding on to. And I do still very much believe that to be the case. That kind of, I think when we do it in held space, we can just travel in deeper. And whether that's one-to-one, when there's somebody holding that space for you, it just allows a greater level of safety. So for you to be able to go in deeper and for your womb to be able to express. So some women, we're all going to experience that journey, that communion in a different way. So I think the body has absolute wisdom in the way that it shows us these things. So that might be kind of like, it might be a visual, it might be a sound, it might be a color, it might be an amazing download, it might just be a sudden understanding and realization. All of those things are totally valid. We get shown things in the way that is most meaningful for us in that particular moment, which might change the next journey and the next and the next and the next.
As you're talking, it's almost like that it's about this kind of receiving wisdom from from our womb, but also, yeah, as well as the kind of talking to. It's like that, like you were saying, the opening to a two-way intimate conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, because we're creating that space for her to be able to express, but we can also kind of, you know, ask her, let's go deeper. What else is there? What's underneath that? You know, if that's the case, how does that fit in with that? What do I need as my understanding? What is the wisdom? What's the juicy piece that I need? You know, so we can actually have that conversation, which I just think is so much, you know, and I still do this myself. I often need somebody else to hold that space for me to be able to dive in more deeply. You know, I'm not saying that I don't need to be held as well. I absolutely do, because I just think it just allows for the depth that we wouldn't ordinarily get. And it's, you know, it's like when we, you know, when we do any of our self-work, yeah, we can do a lot on our own. Absolutely, we can. But then we get to a point where we're like, I'm not sure if I'm standing in my own resistance there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, for a lot of women, this sort of work brings up a lot of fear as well. And I think when we're journeying with that ourselves, that can be a lot to hold. Whereas if we're fully supported in that, when whatever comes up, it's nice to have that. And that's certainly been my own experience of having a guide. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to some of the fears that come up for women as they begin kind of journeying into the feminine and communing with their womb.
Yeah, I think I think, you know, there's potential to be fearful that your womb is going to be raging and angry with you, that she's going to be raging and angry with you for not listening, that there's such a level of shame that holds everything in place, that feels insurmountable, that you've maybe already recognized that you've dishonored yourself, you've dishonored your feminine energy from maybe not listening in deeply, not using the wisdom of your menstrual cycle, maybe from sleeping around and not listening to her when she's in pain and she's calling for your attention, whether that's, you know, fertility issues, whether it's menstrual pain, whether it's things like vaginismus, or, you know, a whole host of stuff that we can be holding in this pelvic bowl, this like cradle of pelvic energy, which is, you know, which is so powerful. They're the kind of things that I think stop us from diving into the space.
Yeah. And I was thinking as well,
or there's just such a deep sense of numbness and disconnection that we just don't even feel that's possible.
Yeah, like a fear as well of what we might find, and
absolutely
traumas,
a fear,
I guess, as well.
It's kind of like, oh my gosh, what is there? Because I think we know intrinsically on some level that the sense and the idea of the womb space is a holding and a releasing and letting go. It just becomes a bit of a store ground to be just holding on to past relationships, old patterns, old paradigms, old people. I mean, there's, you know, the things that I find in womb space is quite, you know, can be past partners, can be mom, can be dad, all of these people who, you know, it's kind of like, no, there should be nobody there but your creations, and maybe your children when they're young, or maybe your partner if they're, you know, really struggling and you need to bring them in a little bit closer to kind of really hold them. But, you know, that womb has the capacity to really hold and nurture on a really beautiful level. We did a land healing recently. I did a land healing with a colleague recently, and one of the things that he kind of said was that she was literally holding the energy of the home through her womb space to kind of stabilize what was going on there. So I think I honestly think we're scratching the surface of the capacity of our womb spaces.
So really it's also like a portal to our power and our soul, and we're holding everything. I loved how you said as well about our womb space having kind of like traveled many lifetimes. I just wondered if you could speak more to that, because that was like, oh, that's juicy.
Well, I say that from direct experience rather than from anything that I've read, because I think I'm getting into such a call to really kind of align with the energy of the sacred feminine, but on a really personal, embodied, personal experience level. But I think with one of my first journeys or communions with my womb space, I literally had to kind of write it down, because this information was coming in so quickly. It was like, if I don't write it down as it's being shown to me, then I'm going to miss it. But it was, it's definite wounds around things that I've experienced in past lives, and there were parts of it that were really kind of quite dark and very unpleasant, because we didn't get to clear that energy towards the end of that session. So that suggests to me, knowing a lot about past lives that I've had, that they connect into past lives. There's definitely a big piece around, witches. And
yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
Definitely. Yeah. And being kind of like, I had a piece come through yesterday. So not yesterday, a couple of days ago, I did a womb journey with somebody. She held space for me, and there was some wisdom that needed to come through through my left hand, which was around the woman in the forest, the woman collecting the herbs, the wise woman, as you talk about, the women that kind of shunned and kind of sidelined, and that's that really deep inner witch wound, isn't it? That that if we're not mindful, when we kind of know that there's trauma through our masculine or feminine lines, we kind of just shut down the ability to receive the gifts.
Oh, yeah, I got goosebumps at that. There's so much in that, and I think it just reminds me of like when we come back to the fear that women will feel kind of this work of the reclamation with the feminine. It just reminds me of like, if we don't do that work, and we're here to be witches or spiritual healers, spiritual entrepreneurs, like the costs of not doing it are just huge.
But the thing is, life is a journey, isn't it? And I know people talk about timelines. To me, it's kind of like, yeah, there's a timeline. For me, it's kind of like a destiny line. And, it's not a linear pathway, is it? So there's times when we kind of get taken off down the little side roads, the little cul-de-sacs. But there's still umpteen gifts to receive down that little cul-de-sac. And then we kind of move back onto that main thoroughfare, don't we? And we go a little bit further along. And, ideally, that means that our guides can bring in what we need at any particular time. I mean, it blows my mind to think about how that is all orchestrated in spirit, that at the right time, the right teacher comes in, the right book, the right person, the right place. It's kind of like breathtaking and mind-blowing to kind of like, what does that actually look like? But the thing is, if we miss those cues, they will come around again. They might come around in a different format with a different person, and maybe we'll be a little bit more open to hearing it then.
Yeah, and I think there's something in that piece about seeing that we have choice at every moment and owning our power to choose. But I think when you're working with this kind of feminine communion, I think it really is like exactly like you say, there gets to a point where the desire to go into that outweighs the fear.
Yes.
And that's usually what makes women
exactly. It's kind of like, I've got a choice, but I haven't got a choice. It's kind of like, I have got a choice, but things are moving in such a direction that it doesn't kind of feel like a choice.
Yes, it's like a choiceless choice, I would say. I love that.
So that makes there's never sense. Any judgment, is there, about when somebody is ready to awaken and really hear the next piece, and sometimes we might do a lot of intense healing, and then we might take our foot off the brake, and then we feel kind of like drawn in a different direction, and we kind of like intensify it, and then we kind of take our foot off the pedal, and that's all okay, because it's still in rightful time for us.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as we're choosing it consciously, I think that's the thing that I always say, is that our body knows, and it's really important to choose whatever we're choosing consciously. Something that often women can struggle with, particularly witches, ironically, because of course they have this whole piece from the witch wound about being able to trust their own wisdom. So half time the work is about even getting to that point of being able to trust our bodies and their wisdom, which I guess is also tied into the communion with the womb. So
yeah,
such powerful work.
It's I think a big piece for me was when I really when it all kind of clicked into place, and I was like, okay, so what I'm feeling in my body, what I know to be true for me, that has to be my guide. That has to be my point of reference, because I know myself well enough. If I'm reading energy, particularly if I'm reading energy with the client, and I kind of like, even if it's kind of like really something uncomfortable to share, or it just kind of feels like, oh, have I really got to say that? Not sure how that's going to land. And so I kind of like drop it in, and 9 times out of 10 it resonates, because it's absolutely right. It's getting out of our own way and being that kind of conduit for that person's energy to be reflected back to them, their womb wisdom to be reflected back to them, which doesn't always look like people's expectations of what a treatment or what a session might look like. But
yeah, I always laugh because when I came to feminine reclamation, I was expecting like roses and chocolates, and the complete opposite of what you get.
But I mean, for some women, that's kind of like the starting point, isn't it? So for a lot of women, actually being able to sit in circle with other women, we've experienced so many wounds, whilst we've tried to be women in that masculine paradigm of competition, and actually to be able to sit in circle and actually be held by another woman is just deeply powerful.
Yeah, that's really gorgeous. What just comes to mind is, as I think we were talking about this earlier, is like there's almost just deeper layers, and we talked about, I think it was us that talked about it. If not, then anyway, there's like a spiral of different layers of the healing of the feminine. So yeah, absolutely, it's it really is dependent on where you're at, and there's lots of different ways to dive into feminine healing.
Absolutely. And it's going to look different for everybody, and that's the thing, isn't it? And I think that's the thing about working with feminine energy, it is going to look different for everybody. And there is no kind of right or wrong way. There's no singular path. It's like, which is the bit that sings to your heart and your womb? Which is the bit that kind of lights you up and you're like, yes, that is exactly what I need. That's
Yes.
what I need. But to get to that bit and kind of like bypass the brain that's going, we haven't got enough money, we haven't got enough time, they live in another city, it's too far, it's too this, it's too that. But just kind of like, you know, when we can get to that point where we can just go, okay, I hear you, but let's just kind of like, let's just check in.
Yes,
Let's check
I
in with
love
your
that. I love how
body.
I love how you've broken that down. That's gorgeous. Exactly that. Let me just see if there's anything else that I wanted to explore. I think one of the things that I was just sharing with you before we pressed record as well was when I set the vision for our conversations and the podcast, I always tend to kind of tune into someone's energy and think about them archetypally. That's the way that my mind works. Obviously, I'm creating this archetypal apothecary modality in which I work with archetypal remedies. So I'm usually like sussing out what the remedy of the guest is, or at least the energetic of the conversation. And so I just thought it'd be helpful, given we're just talking about spirals and things, to share that the archetypal energy of this conversation feels very much like the archetypal remedy rose. And this is actually one of the mantras that I use when working with rose as an archetypal energy for feminine embodiment. It was actually gifted to me by one of my mentors, Leanne Brooke Tyler, and she when she was having her own feminine initiation, she was channeling the rose, and it came through that like as a, like, did you call them an acronym? Essentially like a mantra that was relax, open, soften and express, which is obviously rose. And that just so much feels to me to be a kind of summary of the essence of what we're talking to here with the feminine.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, that's like the rose has just got such a beautiful symbology in terms of the feminine energy. And even, you know, for the womb space, but also I think, you know, for the vulva, it's just like, it's so powerful. It's intoxicating as well, isn't it? You know, the sense of the rose. And, you know, if you look at that in terms of as an essential oil, as a, you know, used as a herb, it's just kind of like, yeah, it's just that softening, opening. It's that real heart space energy, isn't it? You know,
Really
I just kind of like feel there's kind of like soft, almost kind of like velvety petals that just kind of draw you in. And what little girl didn't try and make rose perfume in the garden with a bucket and water?
I know, absolutely.
And how horrid did that smell? You just ended up with this kind of like mushy brown mess, and just kind of like, but it's like a starting point, isn't it? Starting to make your own little potions.
Yes, and there's all sorts of ways that we can work that as an archetypal energy. And I'm wondering then, given we're going there, whether there's anything that you can share in terms of practical, like if people are like, well, actually, I'd like to start communing with my womb. Is there a way that you can recommend people actually start doing that?
I think we can, you know, begin by setting that in the intention that that's what we would like to do. I think, you know, we can, it's not so much a meditative practice, but it is kind of, it's starting to come into the body, starting to come into the breath. Just allowing the breath, when the breath feels ready, to take that breath into the heart space. Just allowing the heart to open with the breath, really nice and gently. No pushing, no forcing, no kind of letting go of any kind of expectations. Just allowing it to be as it is. Taking the breath to the heart space and just gently opening that with the breath, and then following a river of breath from the heart space down into the pelvis, and then breathing into the womb space. So, you know, for me, it really helps me to move that energy with my hands. So I might be moving that energy through my field, or I might be placing one hand on my heart space, one hand over my womb, or I might be actually cupping my hand around between my legs, so my two middle fingers are touching my perineum, and kind of like the palm of my hand is over my womb space and mound of Venus. And then just be open to seeing what arises. Maybe just asking that question, what do you want to express? What do you want to show me?
Oh, that feels gorgeous. You know, that felt like a little mini meditation as you were describing it. I was like, oh, I have to re-listen to this one later. That's so gorgeous. I think that would be a really beautiful practice actually for women to begin to work with at home. And yeah, and of course they can bring in the essential oils and all the things to support that, if that feels aligned as well. That's gorgeous. And one of the things actually, funnily enough, that I'm working with at the moment myself is, we talk about archetypes. I work with archetypes a lot, and one of my personal archetypal remedies I'm working with at the moment is Venus. And so I was just wondering, in terms of, because one of the things that occurred to me is that Venus is all about is a planet and also has a day of the week associated with it. So I was just presencing that, because I was like, oh, Friday would be a really good day for these rituals and this kind of work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, we've all got different histories, haven't we? We've all got different lineages, and I think when we begin to kind of do the work, we feel into and find out what our lineages are. So we're all going to come to these places from different avenues. So I think, you know, what we spoke about to begin with, or when we were just having the chat before, is that, you know, I think the work that you do in many ways isn't dissimilar to the work that I do, but we're coming down different pathways, but the kind of the end piece, the end goal is something quite similar, because this is about empowerment, and it's about embodiment. You know, for me, we can't be empowered if we're not embodied. That's like the biggest piece that's come through to me in the last couple of years through the feminine embodiment practices. We can't be empowered if we're not embodied. And the body doesn't safe, and the body feeling safe is such a big piece, isn't it, in terms of a dysregulated nervous system. So calming that and regulating it, and realize what a big piece is that, so that we can actually feel comfortable and safe in the body, so that we can get the depth that we need.
Yeah, I love what you were just speaking to there, actually, about the kind of underlying message being the same, but in unique, different expressions. And I'm speaking to that because essentially that is the core of my work, is helping women see that they have their own unique expression, because essentially they probably are all in some form wanting to express this sort of thing into the world. Maybe not, maybe something different, but if they are feeling a deep call, like this is my work, there will be a unique individual expression of that. So where your remedy would be rose, for example, mine would be phosphorus, which is about magic, and so there's like different lenses. We each have our own different unique archetypal story, which is really medicine for you, for all the people who want the remedy of rose, for me, for all the people who want the remedy of phosphorus. And I think that was just a really great way that you described that. So I just wanted to share more on that, because that feels like that in itself for my women, because they're here to express their witch. Like there can often be that fear of like, oh, we're doing the same work, and you know that can, in the masculine world, that can be this idea of like competition and people being able to copy each other and so on and so on. And I think there's a real distinction there of like, we each have our own unique expression, and that is going to be medicine.
But your resonance and your frequency is clearly very different from mine. And so that's kind of like, that's the calling card, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, how do you feel when you're, you know, when you're sitting in the presence of either yourself or myself? What does it kind of light up in you? And maybe, you know, maybe for some women on their journey, they move between the two and back again, and then go off in a different direction because they're kind of reclaiming the bits of their lineage, the gifts and skills they need to move on to the next bit. So it's never static, is it? That's the thing. It's always kind of growing and evolving and changing, and we need different things at different times, and we need different people at different times as we move along that journey.
Yeah, and we also move through different energetic states as well. So and the kind of core principle of the work that I do is like cures like. So that's very much the grounding in what I was sharing there. So I love that you presenced that. That was perfect. Gorgeous. Let me just see if there was anything else I wanted to ask you, because I think we're coming up close to time now, but it's been such a gorgeous conversation. This really does feel like me, the energy of Rose. I think pretty much we covered everything. I guess I'm just coming back to the communing with the womb for deep healing. I think you talked a little bit about the feminine as a gateway to our soul gifts, and I just wondered if there's anything that you had to add on that before we complete.
I suppose when you ask that question, I'm not sure if I'm completely going to answer that specific question, but what comes to mind is just bringing a little bit of clarity to that, connecting in with the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, and not seeing and recognizing the piece of the divine masculine and sacred masculine. So it's kind of like, yeah, I think we need to reclaim that feminine energy, but for me that's not the end point. The idea in the sense is that we can move with ease between masculine and feminine. Yes, we might have lots of wounds in terms of the masculine, but rather than going into that blame, we need to take responsibility for our own part within that, and clear what we need to in terms of our connection, relation to our feminine, and then see what the masculine is holding. Because most of us will be, our masculine energy will be absolutely exhausted because it's been running and running and running without the sustenance and the nurture of the feminine. So, the way that I see it when I'm working with the energy of the ovaries is almost like an infinity symbol with the womb space in the middle, so that we can flow from the being to the doing. But there is resourcing, and we know when to kind of pull back, when to rest, when to have fun, pleasure, joy, and when we need to action. And I'm still learning on that one, as we all are, I'm sure. It's, it's very easy to kind of slip into old patterns, isn't it? But I suppose the key is that each time we do, we recognize that a little bit earlier. And then we can go, oh, okay, that's kind of like, that's still coming up. There's still a little piece there that I need to look at and be with and feel into what that is about.
I love that. There's a couple of things that came up for me there that I think you're speaking to. Well, one I I feel like I see that slightly differently to you, in the way that I would describe it is that we're kind of feminine essence beings who receive the masculine. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's kind of a little bit different to how you see it. But as you say, we're all kind of journeying with that and our own felt embodied experience of it. But the other piece that stood out to me was the piece where you said about taking responsibility. And I loved that. I don't know if you've read The Queen's Code by Alison Armstrong at all, but she but it was like one of my teachers in that I've done a lot with her work. And yeah, there's a real sense of like, when we're coming to feminine embodiment work, and I don't know if this is what you're even speaking to, but I'm just going to share it in case it was, there's like almost a sense of like, we can get very angry with the masculine and kind of rebel against it. And
that's exactly what I'm speaking about.
Yeah, gorgeous. Well, yeah, so that's I think that's really powerful to highlight, because there's this kind of, especially for the witch who has been, you know, experienced awful treatment by the patriarchy through, you know, and that's built into our DNA. But I think when we start to rebel against the masculine, that's still coming from a place of fear, rather than us being fully in our feminine, in our hearts, in love. So yeah, there's been a whole journey of reclamation. I could talk about that for hours, but I loved that you shared that.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
sorry, just actually the other piece about that, just linking it back to the first thing I said about being feminine essence beings who receive the masculine. If we're rebelling against the masculine, we can't receive the masculine.
Sure, and I totally hear you on the receiving, absolutely, and that's what happens within spiritual sexual union, isn't it? It's a receiving, but it's a receiving of the highest expression of that masculine. But for us to be able to receive that, we've got to be able to embody that ourselves, haven't we?
Yeah, gorgeous. I loved what you shared there. Yeah, amazing. Well, that feels like a juicy a juicy note to end on. Thank you so much. That's been gorgeous. I would love for you to share how people can find out about your work and you, and I'll include that in the show notes, but if you just want to speak a little bit to that, then yeah.
Yes. So what did I can't remember what I said to you. Have you got it there?
I haven't, no.
Okay,
but is there somewhere
so
on social media and your website that people can find you? Oh, I have got it actually.
oh,
It's
perfect.
yeah, do you want me to read it, or?
Yes, if you would.
Yes, so Andrea is available on her website at rootmedicine.co.uk, which is ROOT, and then also Instagram root.medicine, and Facebook Root Medicine UK. So yeah, are there any projects that you're particularly working on that you'd like to share?
Yes, so I'm not sure when this podcast is coming out, so I think it's going to be too late for this particular offering, which is on Sunday. So that is a womb communion workshop. You can, what else have I got coming up? I can't even remember what I wrote there. Nicole, have you got it there?
There was something about wild feminine exploration and then feminine frequency.
Yes, absolutely. So the Wild Feminine Exploration is usually an online event. I have got a hankering to do that in person as well, though. But that's really about getting into the body, feeling comfortable in the body, feeling safer in the body, so that we can actually work with internal self-massage. So that usually is 2 hours over 2 days, or 4 hours in total over 2 days, and that's usually online. I haven't got a date for that, but that will be coming up, so you can find out about that on my Instagram or website. I'm in the process of putting together, well, it's been it's been a 2-year plus process of putting together a 12-month program, which is going to be called the Conscious Evolutionary. And that is working with a dear friend and colleague called Mike Neville, and that will be in person. So that will be monthly weekends with some online connections as well. So that should be coming out. The kind of timeline on that is probably coming out sometime in September. Again, you'll be able to see that on my Instagram. And if
Mm.
anybody wants to check in with a root voice activation meditation, you can do that through my website. There's a little sign up there on my website on the homepage, but also there's a link in my bio on Instagram. And that's like a 30-minute journey to bring you into a deeper communion with your root voice.
Oh, I love that. Wow, I've already felt like your voice was a meditation today, so I'm going to be checking that one out. So thank you so much, Andrea. It's been gorgeous to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me, Nicole. Absolute pleasure.
It's my pleasure. There was so much in that episode, and I love particularly how Andrea was also informed by Tammy Lynn Kent's Wild Feminine book, which if you haven't checked out, I'll put in the show notes. It's an amazing book. But here are my takeaways from my conversation with Andrea. Womb communion is opening to a two-way intimate conversation with our wombs about feelings, allowing space for our womb to fully express what she's holding. Our wombs are aspects of our consciousness, and they've travelled with us for many lifetimes. Our wombs carry and hold so much, from trauma to shame to fear, and we want them to know that they're able to release that holding. That is the aim of womb communion, as well as figuring out what it wants to let us know about our soul purpose. We've often experienced a sense of disconnection from our wombs in this culture. Things like addiction, alcohol, TV, social media, and even work hustle can be ways of us ignoring the secret wisdom in our wombs. And this really is an invitation to go deeper. It can feel scary to begin to commune with our wombs. We can hit up against harsh masculine energy and fear, but it really offers us a chance to hear our souls. Communing with our wombs helps us to go deeper into understanding ourselves. And a simple way of doing that is to begin by asking her, what do you want to express? And listening. We can also journey with her physically, moving energy with our hands and placing our hands over our womb space and being open to seeing what arises. Overall, our wombs hold so much wisdom that's invaluable to our true purpose. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.